I was telling you, I was looking and at the charging documents, the affidavit for this guy. And because it's presented as, it was used as the launch pad to go and impugn the characters of half the country, but also he was presented as some right winger, and people kept saying, well, the charging documents really underscore that. So I read them. It's all linked for you in the email newsletter if you get it. Here's the paragraph, and I want you to listen to this, and you tell me if you think. Now remember, police had said that his online posts were, quote, widely contradictory. His neighbors described him as a leftist, but it surprised them that he was attacking other leftists. And he lived in a place, at his place he had a gay pride flag and a BLM flag out front. And he was a Castro nudist activist. Totally sounds like a mega MAGA guy, right? So here's the paragraph. I just want you to listen to this really quickly. And I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. I don't care. DePape stated he was going to hold Nancy hostage and talk to her. This is from the affidavit. If Nancy were to tell DePape the quote-unquote truth, he would let her go. And if she quote-unquote lied, he was going to break her kneecaps. DePape was certain that Nancy would not have told the truth. In the course of the interview, DePape articulated that he viewed Nancy as leader of the pack of lies told by the Democratic Party. DePape also later explained that by breaking her kneecaps, she would then have to be wheeled into Congress, which would show other members of Congress that there were consequences to actions. He also explained generally that he wanted to use her to lure another individual to DePape. This is from his statement to police. Remember, this guy, first off, he was in the country illegally, number one. Number two, he was described as being legitimately crazy by everybody. He thought he was Jesus for a year and a half, or for a year, and he lived in a nudist commune with a bunch of other far-left people, and his wackadoo posts were all over the political spectrum. I mean, he railed against Republicans. He railed against Democrats. What I got from this paragraph, my initial thought was that she wasn't far enough left for him. That he viewed them as being part of the Democrat establishment. Now, if that's the case, that would make him more of a Bernie bro type than a traditional Democrat. The reason I bring this up and that I'm focusing on it isn't because I care about politics, is because I don't think politics actually play into this. It would be very easy for me to say he checks more boxes of a leftist than anybody else, and just go ahead and, brush my hands off and say it's totally the left. And I wouldn't be wrong, actually. I mean, you look at Bernie Sanders, their volunteer tried to assassinate a whole baseball field of congressional members. I mean, right after Biden's speech last night, I don't know if you guys saw this, but there were 2 different incidents that took place. If you guys were aware, let me pull this up really quickly. There were 2 different incidents right after his speech, after Biden's speech. Dan Bolduc's campaign, he was apparently the victim of an attempted assault while walking into his debate. Somebody tried to attack and punch him, and that individual was arrested. Bolduc wasn't harmed. And then there was a North Side man, according to Chicago Sun-Times, charged with sending the GOP governor hopeful Darren Bailey a voicemail death threat saying, quote, "I know where his kids sleep." So both of those things happened right after Biden's speech, just FYI. But I don't think that I think the guy was nuts. I think he was nuts. I think he didn't really honestly, maybe he was more left than right, but I am so tired of the guy was nuts, and he viewed this person he viewed Nancy Pelosi as a figure of authority and tried to get in the House. The bigger question, and I mentioned this too, it's being used as chilling speech. This is a great post that David Harsanyi had. He said, this weekend, John Dickerson was wringing his hands on CBS News. He wrote this over at The Federalist, over the alleged structural and rhetorical pro-violence position of the right. You see this trick, right? And he says, you got to conserve, and if otherwise you're accused of coddling the extremists in the first place. He says, on the other hand, when a Black Lives Matter fan murders 5 Dallas police officers, the coverage is virtually devoid of any political concern. There's no CBS News panel convening to agonize over the left's support for BLM after riots decimated neighborhoods across the nation in 2020, the costliest in American history. No, not even after the future vice president helped bail people out who participated in that violence, one of whom would later be accused of murder. And when a man who volunteers for the presidential campaign of Bernie Sanders attempts to assassinate Republican leadership on a baseball field in Alexandria, no one in major media tells us it's a culmination of socialist decades-long demonizing of non-socialists. When an an assassin brings a Glock, extra ammo, a knife, pepper spray, and zip ties from California to D.C. to murder a Supreme Court justice 2 years after Chuck Schumer warned justices that they had released the whirlwind and would pay the price, not only did we not have a national conversation about the perils of toxic rhetoric, the story was barely covered, appearing on page 20 of the New York Times. And to finish that quote, from that excerpt, I would add to that Lee Zeldin. They tried to stab him on stage. Any attack like this is not free speech, and it's heinous, and it shouldn't happen. But this is about chilling speech ahead of an election and using it to generate sympathy as voters leave the Democrat Party in droves. Where was the concern when Pelosi herself repeatedly labeled Republicans as, I quote, enemies of the state? I have over 9 audio sound bites of that. To say nothing of the additional quotes that she gave to other press in scrums. Where was that at? Where was that? Where was the call for toning down the rhetoric? Out there calling people enemies of the states. They are enemies. They are extremists, mega MAGA. I am not going to pretend that the right comes anywhere close to the left in terms of political violence. We ain't going to play that game. It's something the left can honestly claim first place with. But I don't think that this DePape guy represents all of the left at all. And I don't think that his attack was provoked by national conversation. I think we should spit on the idea that our words are violence and that we have to pool our discussions and police our debates so we don't upset the freaks among us. And this all, by the way, distracts from some very real and serious questions that remain unanswered. Where was Capitol Police at? Why were they not monitoring these cameras? They were installed over 8 years ago. Washington Post couldn't even handle that question in their piece. I read this yesterday evening. They were distancing themselves. They were distracting themselves with their own bias. They go, oh, well, House Democrats repeatedly reminded leaders in January, after January 6th, that campaign coffers were not enough to pay for personal security or upgrades to their homes. The leaders they reminded were the leaders in charge, Nancy Pelosi and other Democrats. They ran the damn thing. We can send billions of dollars to Ukraine. We can reassign college debt. We can pass $1 trillion spending package and all kinds of other stuff. But the security requests apparently weren't a priority. Well, at least they're consistent. They don't value security in schools either.